Welcome back. You're watching Your Story on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial.
Residents and the business community in the Nelson Mandela Bay have rejected the proposed electricity tariff hike of 15% over 3 years as proposed by Eskom.
This emerged during the NERSA public hearings in Port Elizabeth. The Nelson Mandela Bay Chamber of Business and Public have presented oral submissions opposing the embattled power utilities' request for the tariff hike.
Eskom has also made admissions that it could have prevented the looming tariff hike. Our reporter Jayed-Leigh Paulse attended the hearings.
Well, we saw that NERSA hearings take place in Port Elizabeth, and it was surprising to see a very full house. Several members of the public also availed themselves to listen into Eskom, as well as NERSA, and also the Nelson Mandela Bay Chamber, who also has come out rejecting that 15% annum increase over the next 3 years, taking it to 45%. But I think it's very interesting to also find out how this process is going to take place. We know that it was in Cape Town. They're moving to KwaZulu-Natal tomorrow, and how this will be unfolding. And with me, I'm joined right now by Nomfundo Masetu, and she is the main regulator at NERSA, just to break down the process for us, but also to tell us how today's hearings went. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Masetu. Just tell us, how were the proceedings here in Nelson Mandela Bay, and how was it received?
The proceedings were received quite well, and we've got quite a diverse stakeholders today. We've got business, so we could hear the perspective of business, the communities from different regions, from PE, from Tata, and from East London. We also heard from Eskom, and Eskom has come out quite honestly today, making certain acknowledgement and admissions on the some of the mistakes that they have done, as well as the challenges in their capacity or in their ability to generate more electricity using their plants. So they've stated very clearly, for instance, that one of the assumptions that are part of this application that we are evaluating, that of the availability of their coal fleet to produce electricity, is that they will have a challenge because it has deteriorated. It has dropped from the projection of 78%. It has now come down to 63%. So we expect Eskom therefore to revise its figures, also the sales volume figures, because it looks unlikely, it appears to be unlikely that they will meet, the sales volumes that are currently in the application, and therefore they will also need to revise the revenue that they are requesting NERSA to allow them to recover from the consumers of electricity in South Africa. They said that they will therefore make a revised presentation as well as a revised application in the public hearings that are going to be held in Gauteng, and we welcome that undertaking from Eskom. We think that they are quite cooperative in the process, and they are quite also honest in terms of the challenges that they are facing, and they are also quite honest with regards to some of the costs that are within their controls. And the other element that we wanted to make sure that Eskom will demonstrate is the accountability for their own actions, just to make sure that they do not transfer all the risk as well as the negative impact to consumers and business. So in that regard, Eskom has proposed that it will consider making certain adjustments based on their capacity constraints, supply side constraints, and they will also make adjustments based on the fact that the consumers now, they've shown that they are quite sensitive to any significant price increase by consuming less. And by consuming less, it means that Eskom won't sell as much as it has projected, and that will create the revenue gap. So Eskom needs to be realistic and therefore revise those figures downwards, and we made that very clearly that we do expect Eskom. So it looks like what is before us today and what has been submitted to NERSA, it will change in the next couple of weeks, where Eskom will now really look into even its production plan, and the plants that we know they are not going to form part of the production fleet, so they need to be taken out, because they have stated clearly that some of those plants will not be used in the next 3 years. So we therefore cannot allow consumers to pay for those plants that are not going to contribute for the supply of the service.
And that's very true. I think the two words that came out of today's hearings was accountability and responsibility from Eskom. Just looking at people who want to know what's going to happen to their pockets. I mean, those that are in disadvantaged areas that don't have the capacity or the money in order to pay for this huge tariff hike that we're going to be seeing that's looming over our heads. What can NERSA say to those people?
Well, at this stage, there is nothing that we can promise to the people, because we are still looking at what is before us, the request of 15%. However, it appears today that based on the undertakings made by Eskom, that they will revise that figure. So we do expect that the figure will come down, or the extent of the increase will therefore come down, if Eskom indeed will take accountability for its own actions and not add cost that the consumers are not supposed to pay for due to the to mismanagement as well as irresponsible actions on the part of Eskom. Consumers also stated clearly that even 5% they will not be able to afford. So the affordability aspect is quite serious, and it is something that Eskom must take into consideration, and we expect them to make certain proposals, and some of the recommendations also from the business chamber here in the Bay. They've stated that perhaps the Eskom needs to look into its tariff structures and try and optimize those tariff structures and rationalize them so that they make sure that cost comes down. So we'll hear what Eskom will then propose. I see that Eskom wants to push that to NERSA. Unfortunately, we do not make a case for the licensee. They will have to make a proposal. We'll look into the reasonableness of the proposal and take a decision.
Very interesting there. That was Nomfundo Maseti, the main regulator at NERSA, saying that Eskom is going back to the drawing board and they'll be looking at their submissions that they will be tabling to Gauteng, but also saying it was very interesting that on the second day, the NERSA hearings coming out of Port Elizabeth, that these submissions were made out, and that they actually saw some flaws within that tariff hike percentage of 15% that would be implemented, or expected to be implemented in the next 3 years, but we will be keeping an eye on that. And with that, it's back to you in studio.